All right, then we will call the meeting to order. And we need to adopt the agenda today.
Madam Chair, we will not have a disability request to review today.
All right, thank you. We'll take that. A motion to adopt.
So moved.
the agenda.
Sorry. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Chair votes aye. All right, and then we also need a motion to approve the minutes from December 2nd, if you had an opportunity to read through those.
Move approval. And I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving December 2nd's minutes indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. All right, well, this is an opportunity for public comments. Not a lot of public present here, but I know Sarah Piper from MFPE is here as well. And if you wanted to say anything, Sarah, you may.
Oh, I don't have anything in particular, but thank you all for being here. And it's a pleasure to get to hear how things are going today.
Thank you.
So for Dee and Dan and even Sarah, would it work better if I share my screen with the board packet, or would you rather see the room? Because once I share the screen, it's hard to see the room.
I'd rather share the screen so I can see that, because I know all your lovely faces. I'd rather see the screen.
I'm impartial. We'll go with D.
Okay, so now you should see the agenda, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you.
Get us to administrative business. Thanks.
I did. Oh, and then I am going to read this because I forgot to.
Oh, under public comment.
Yeah, under public comment, this is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it's included on the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases or other adjudicative proceedings. So forgot to read that, I'm sorry, but we're on to administrative business discussion items, and we'll start with Dan Trost with the investment report.
Met with the Board of Investments this week, actually. So fresh news, although I think Dan is on the agenda here in a minute, so I'll leave most of it to him. But January was pretty good. Everyone's kind of seen the numbers up through the end of December. We had a good January. Numbers are looking a little bit better. I think we all got that email too. So that's good. One of the interesting things from the meeting, they changed our quarterly reporting. And I think you guys have access to this too. It's all public information, but it's just way cleaner, and there's more pretty pictures and less words and numbers, and it looks really good. One page that I really appreciated is, and I guess there's one for each asset class, but the one for CAP is page 11 of the report. I wish I would have got this to you earlier, but just to explain what it looks like, it shows the allocation of our pension funds, and it's got a little box that shows the range of acceptable allocations, and then it shows exactly where we're at. And so anytime we're away from the midpoint or out of the box, there's a discussion about it. Because I think one of the most important things we do as a board, and one of the most important things that the staff at the BOI does, is figure out what the right allocation is. That really drives returns. So this is a really quick one-page way for us to see exactly where we're at and whether or not we're inside of the policy parameters. So I really liked that one. There's a bunch of really cool charts. We had a very long discussion with our contractor who helps with allocation, helps with economic reports and things. So that was really cool. And we actually, because it was Zoom, because the roads were so bad, things went a little quicker than normal. So we packed a day and a half worth of meeting into one day. So that was kind of interesting too, but Dan's working on a whole bunch of things at the legislature. He wasn't even there for about half the meeting. That also sped it up, I think. But it was a good meeting and they're doing a great job. I mean, the more I sit in those meetings and the more I discuss with staff, they're just really impressive. I think the folks there, most of them could work at any investment bank in the country. We're lucky that they want to be in Montana. Absolutely.
I think it's interesting to have your perspective on that too, because you've worked in this industry your whole life. Well, I don't know your whole life, but
Most of it.
yeah, and to see this public side of it too. And
Yeah,
just,
it really is. Yep, I really enjoyed it.
right. Okay, then let's do, Nolan is here for the annual comprehensive financial report. Thank you for that, by the way. We have, no, do they have these, were these mailed to them?
They were not
Okay.
mailed.
We do have a book
Yeah, we
here.
weren't sure who was gonna be
Yeah.
here. They are mailed now to both
Okay,
Dan and Dee,
Oh,
so,
did you
Okay.
put them in? Okay.
yeah, this morning, so they won't get for a little bit, but. I just wasn't sure who was gonna be here, but, yeah, so I won't, read this thing cover to cover or anything. This is the 2022 annual report as of June 30th. Took the auditors a little longer to get us their audit opinion than usual. We did receive an unmodified opinion and there's no recommendations. So that's the, I guess, key highlight, went through the audit and it was a clean audit. And, the main highlights, I guess, are going to be on page like 2021. Those are, our statement of fiduciary net position and our changes in net position and kind of the rest of the notes to those financial statements cover what's on those two pages for the most part. So if anyone has any questions about any of this, obviously feel free. There is an actuarial section, an investment section, and a statistical section at the end. So I won't spend a lot of time.
I was just gonna mention, I mentioned it to Sean this morning, I've scanned through these things for years and listened to your presentations and they're always good. But actually put a pedal to the metal and read like 99% of it.
Oh, wow.
And have to admit, I really felt it was well done. I really felt it gives a good picture of where we are, not just financially, but policy wise, where we're at with the actuaries and of course even the statistics stuff at the end was, I think, pretty interesting. So
I appreciate that. And I do get a lot of help from Darla. So.
that's probably why.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Makes it look a lot better.
yes, Steve.
I always say a clean audit is always music to my ears, so good on the staff for putting it together and being on point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
So unless there's any questions on the financial report, I won't spend any more time on it. And obviously, if there's ever any questions on anything that's in that report, feel free to give me a call. Moving on to the current financial statements where we sit, and actually I should say current, these are as of January 31st, here in the agenda or the board packet. So these are in comparison to where we were as of January 31st of 2022. As you remember, the kind of financial turmoil in the United States and abroad hit February of last year. So this was kind of like the high water mark that you'll see as of January 31st of 2022. So, this is the balance sheet and you can see that our cap pool, you know, in comparison to where we were at January 31st of 2022 is down about $650. So, so I think that things haven't, you know, are improving in that area. Member Trost could probably speak more to that, but, you know, definitely in comparison to where we were at this point last year, it does look a little rough, but total assets, that's where you see in that it's about the same, you know, the total assets difference of about 650 million in comparison to last year. The rest of it, there's really not a lot that jumps out. I mean, obviously we have our new reporting standard where we have our intangible right to use the building and things like that you'll see, and our new liability for our standard lease on this building. So those are some of the differences. Our year-to-date income is in the red currently, and we'll get into that in the next few pages. Any questions on the balance sheet? So the fund balance statement, this is, you know, you'll see where our revenues, about 180, 190 million this year. So it is, you know, positive revenue, which is important. Just, you know, in comparison to last year, obviously not as lucrative. And our total expenses there, you know, are very similar to where we were at last year. So, our, you know, that leaves our total revenue over expenses in the negative, but, you know, we do have positive returns, so that's important. Any questions on the balance?
I do have a question. This is Dee, Madam Chair.
Yes.
What, could you go back at least 2 years? What did the total revenue look like in 2021? I mean, I'm hoping we're not cutting in half as we go forward is my.
I mean, I'd have to grab some of that information from my office, and I certainly can do that. But you know, what I can say is like I said, this June 31st of 2022 is kind of the highest our fund balance ever has been in the history of TRS.
Okay.
And so I couldn't really tell you what it was as of June 30th of like 2020. But we did have, you know, 27% return in, was it 2021?
Yeah.
In fiscal year. So, you know, so if you kind of look at the 27% return, and then last year we had a negative 4% return. I mean, we certainly, I would say, you know, have a lot higher fund balance than we did as of, you know, 2020, but I couldn't tell you what exactly that number is, but I can certainly go grab it if you want me to. So,
Would you like that?
You could just email it to me. I'm just curious about, I want to look at history and looking at predictions. I mean, isn't that what actuarials do?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the biggest change you're gonna see our contributions, so the money we bring in on contributions is gonna fall right in line from one year to the next. You know, it goes up slightly around 2 to 3% each year. Where the big swings are the investment revenue. I mean,
Right.
that's really what it's at. And in 21, we added just over $1 billion in investment earnings, and then in 22, you know, we lost 400 or 500 million of that just due to the swing in the market. But we can provide you, we have all this data going back as far as you would like to see it. I mean, it's certainly available.
Yeah, I just want to go back a couple years and just look at the difference.
And for me, Dee, I've, has been on the board a long time. It was very interesting to see it go over $5 billion. And then come back down again is, darn, but, I remember when it was 3 billion. I remember when it was 2 billion, we've increased our overall, revenue, or not revenue, but amount of money in there a lot. So it's interesting just to watch it go up and down over the years, definitely.
Well, we can tell that in our own IRAs.
Yeah, this is so much money. It's like, wow.
And you can see, I guess, I mean, there's probably several tables like this throughout the financial report, but and I know you don't have this in front of you, Dee, but if it is in the, posted to the website, our annual report. But on page 44, 45 is the schedule of changes in the net pension liability, which part of the net pension liability includes our fiduciary net position. And it goes from 2014, these are all as of June 30th, of course. So June 30th of 2014 and each year through 2022. And you can see, I guess, as of 2020, it was like $4.1 billion was our fiduciary net position. And then the most recent was 4.7. So, an increase of roughly 550 million to 600 million, right in that range, from 2020. So, but yeah, I mean, as of 2014, it was $3.6 billion. So, it's, in that time frame, it's over $1 billion increase in the fiduciary net position.
All right, thank you.
One more comment,
Yes.
if I could. So I think the way the actuaries are looking at it and the way that I kind of look at it is over a very, very long period of time. And the actuaries are estimating that we're gonna hit a 7.3% rate of return. And we have, since inception, we're above that level still, regardless of a rough market. So that's the way that I think about it over really long periods of time. This plan is not just one bad year. This plan is 100 years, maybe. So if we can look at the really, really long-term returns, it smooths out the rough years.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, this is Dan
Yeah.
Chamberlain. I'd like to add a comment to that. I was thinking the same thing, Dan, as Dee was asking her questions about short-term fluctuations, especially in this COVID period for the last 3 years when we saw a great recovery in 21 and 20 and 21, and then 22 was such a rough year. Dan is right to say that this is long-term. I've hoped to offer just a brief cautionary tale about what might happen long-term in the future to expected growth rates, GDP rates around the world. It's been demonstrated that as countries become first world countries, eventually their GDP growth rates go down. So as that development hopefully continues around the world, then possibly we'll see a reduction over a long period of time in what can be expected on those returns. That will have to be figured into the actuarial assumptions. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's something that the board is responsible for observing.
So I'm just getting back to the actual financial statements as of June 31st of 2023. If there's any questions on the balance sheet, I mean, some of the, or sorry, on the fund balance statement, the investment revenue by source and expenses by type on page 21. There's, the biggest thing you're going to see is just our investment appreciation, depreciation. Again, just keep in mind that last spring was, where we had a large downturn. So as of January 31st, that appreciation still looked pretty good. I think by next board meeting, you're going to see a bigger difference or a smaller difference, I should say, and it's going to look a little more similar. And then our, as far as our admin expenses, it's, you know, very similar to what it was, you know, as of this point last year. Probably the biggest difference there is just inflation. Moving on to the budget status report, as of January 31st, we're projecting roughly, you know, anywhere from 150 to 200,000 surplus. We do have a fair amount of vacancy savings this year from open positions. So that's where you're seeing that in total, you know, the personal services surplus there. If there's any questions on any of that, let me know. Our contracted services is just our biggest expense category. We're about 58% through the year as of January 31st, and we've spent, you know, 57.7, so we're kind of right on track there with that.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could I ask a question of Sean then? Do we still need people?
Are you referring to staff members? Are we still
Yes.
trying to hire? So all of our positions were filled up through today, and Amber Mullen has accepted a new position in a different state agency. So we currently have posted a benefits specialist position for the active team, but that's the only vacancy we have at this time. And that vacancy just actually, today's her last day with TRS. The other couple positions have been filled.
All right, wish her well, thank you.
All right, and again, there's no delinquent agencies, you know, as of the beginning of this month. Now, we're obviously past the due date for the January reports, and there's just a couple that don't have their January reports in, and you know, I've been talking with them, so it's kind of a every month situation. That's all I have, unless there's any questions, Madam Chair.
Thanks, so.
Not so much a question. I did notice that the contributions were just down just a
Yeah.
touch from last year. That's surprising.
Yeah.
But most of it.
You know, it could have been just a timing thing. Yeah, I have a feeling, because, you know, at the end of the year, once we get all of the contributions, they will likely be up by, you know, a little bit just because of the increase in the percentage, you know. And I can't imagine that, you know, the membership is down, or active membership, so that's the only other really driver. Yeah, same time.
All right. Now we're on the Personnel Committee report. And Scott and I met with Sean today to go over his appraisal report or appraisal form, performance appraisal form. And we had also met with, oh goodness, Jim Kearns, and he's very, very helpful with this. We met on a Zoom meeting about a week and a half ago, and just kind of went through things and discussed the comments. We discussed the ratings that people give to Sean. We had 10 employees do the survey. We had all of the board members do the survey, and then Sean rates himself. And so we take into account all of those things. All of the ratings are very high. If we look at the numbers, 5 is exceptional, 1 is unacceptable. All of Sean's ratings are between outstanding and exceptional, and he has a few completely exceptional ratings along the way. I think Scott and I will just quickly talk about 4 just separate areas and just let you know that, you know, I'll talk about the strategic plan implementation. We commented to Sean that we appreciate the fact that drives what the board does. It drives what they're working on as an overall staff. And it just keeps us focused and apprised of what is going on. And we understand when things can't happen but we're always aware of what can't happen, what can happen with this. So his overall rating there was extremely high. And we're just very pleased with that fact that that is how kind of we can take into account what's going on.
In terms of the networking and outreach, I had mentioned to Sean this morning, I think this might be, from my perspective, one of the more important objectives that's listed in his evaluation. He had a 4.8 rating in that, but you know, the importance of this is huge to the board and to the system. And Sean does a great job of communicating with our educational partners. He does a great job of communicating with the state agencies and the governor's office. We'll talk about legislative kinds of things later on, but whether it's BOI or you know, SAM or any of the organizations that we work with, he has really stepped up to the plate, and I think more than met our expectations in terms of providing that important first impression, public relations, things are, you know, picture of TRS and how it fits within the whole scope of things. And of course, the centerpiece of all of that really is communications, and it's super tied to our staff and what our staff does. And I think Sean's ratings are a result of that. But you know, to say that on an individual basis that Sean is well respected amongst the educational and state agency groups around the state's an understatement. He's very respected, and he does a great job for us in that regard.
And then the next thing we look at, the next objective is supervision, performance management. And that is probably the hardest thing for the board to know really what's going on. So we do a survey to our staff members, and a nice amount of them filled it out, and they typically do. And there are comments that are very helpful. Sometimes comments that we need to address with Sean. Nothing this time that we were at all concerned about. We very much appreciate the staff, because you know, it feels like the leadership is respected. It feels like it's appreciated. You know, with the pay plan and all of the things that they've gone through this year, everything that we read and everything that we heard was positive. And that is really the only indication that we have what, you know, on a day-to-day basis, what's going on. And a good amount of people filled out the survey, at least a third, a little bit more than that. So just wanted to say thank you to the staff for doing that, because I know personally, when I get these, you know, surveys, I'm like, oh, one more thing. And, you know, then when I fill it out, sometimes I'm crabby about filling it out. So sometimes the comments might not be,
So
none of
that's where
those
that
were.
came from.
Yes, exactly.
Madam
So
Chair, Madam Chair, are those employees submitting those questionnaires on an anonymous basis?
And I did want to reiterate that, yes, absolutely. And our consultant, Jim, he will go through, and he does not even give like the exact comments. He will water those down and let us know, like restate it in a different way. So that it really and truly is, I feel, I mean, I would have no idea who said these things. And so, and typically I don't even know who filled out the form. This year I do, because we're going to do a drawing at the end. But that's the only way I know how or who filled out the forms. So, yeah.
Well, and I think you can get, obviously you can get a handle on from the comments that staff has provided. When you get down to the competencies at the end of this, and you'll see that almost all of the ratings coming from staff are really high. In fact, the only part of this evaluation that had ratings for a 4 was from Sean. It really wasn't coming from staff or board. So that's kind of where we're at with this whole thing. In terms of the legislature, I mentioned that earlier. This was one area that was a 5 on his rating scale from the board, pretty much across the board. And you look at all of the different things. You know, the legislature is a 3-month kind of microcosm of stuff that we point towards and things that we go toward. And Sean just does a wonderful job with that, from the preparation and the presentations at hearings. And I don't know how many of you've had a chance to see Sean in action during those settings. I know Dee has, but from my perspective, that's pretty scary standing in front of those people, making all of those comments and saying all those things and keeping a clear head about yourself. And I'm sure Dee has all kinds of stories about people that don't do that. I would probably be one of those. So I can really appreciate what Sean brings to the table in that regard. His reports are outstanding, and I think he does a great job of just bringing a nice, calm presence to whatever the hearing is, or whatever the pension study group or legislative session meetings, interim meetings, what have you. So I think he does a great job, and I think a lot of that is just from his experience and from his demeanor, and he does a great job with those. And I do know from the field, on the education side, how much they appreciate having somebody go into those meetings and be positive, regardless what the situation is, and be supportive of educators. So that's from my perspective, that's a super score.
And just the last part are the competencies, and we go through things like leadership, communication, research and analysis, planning and vision, working relationships, innovation, commitment, and safety. And all of those things are self-appraised, staff rated, and board rated. And then we come to a final rating. And again, all of those are lowest, from 4.3 all the way up to a 5.0. The 4.3 was in innovation. And we talked to Sean about, this is not really an organization we want to be really innovative. We kind of like our retirement the way it is. And I'm speaking as a teacher who's ready to retire someday. And so, yeah, we're not looking for like new retirement ideas out there. So,
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I
Yes.
I wanted to jump in on the legislative side of this. If we want to watch Sean in action, remember that at ledge.mt.gov, you can view it over the internet and watch him in front of committee. I know from my own perspective that Sean was the kind of director that could tell my committee not just no, but hell no in a very nice way.
I love it, Dee. Thank you for that perspective. Especially from a former legislator.
I was trying to figure out how to say that, Dee, but you did a much better job.
Yeah, well, so we've got that taken care of for the next year. And this also, when we talk to him, it kind of sets up what he'll be appraised on next year. And that will also come from when we're going to look at our strategic plan again. So we use a lot of this to come together and, that we know what we're talking about. And I think it's a really positive thing. So, yeah.
The only other comment that I would make on it is, this is kind of one time when all of this coalesces a little bit, but really it comes down to staff and board working through all of this stuff over the long haul. And I think as a board member, we should feel pretty good about how things are going, because we're a big part of that. And not everybody operates this way. And I think we should appreciate the things when they're positive, and obviously this is a reflection of the positive things that are going on in the system.
And the last thing I'll say today is that I sent out a letter to the staff members just thanking them, because we cannot, I'm not here in Helena. I don't see the day-to-day. I have people call me sometimes. I have all kinds of things happen, emails, things like that, but typically we don't know the day-to-day. So we appreciate staff filling out their surveys. And so we decided to do a drawing, and we thought we'd do it today. Big, hubbub about it. Daniel, would you pick out who gets the $25 Amazon gift card? It's a big deal.
So make sure to get only one here.
I wish it could be more.
Tina West.
Oh, there you go. So Tina's our new admin assistant.
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
Oh, cool.
That's fun. We appreciate that. So thank you to everybody who filled those out. All right. So we will move on to our tentative meeting dates. The next one is scheduled for May 5th. If we could all look at our calendars for May 5th.
Vigilante Day.
What is that?
What's that?
Cinco de Mayo
Cinco
too.
de Mayo.
That's true.
Have a parade in front of the building,
Oh, really?
vigilante parade.
Oh, fun.
Plus, we all go out and solve crimes.
Is that what they did?
Well, there was a lot of investigations.
It works for me, so.
Good.
Daniel and Dee, does that work for you?
I already have hotel reservations.
All right.
And that'll likely be a meeting that goes into the afternoon, because we do our, our annual budget at that meeting. So. Good.
That's better because the roads aren't quite as bad in May.
Yeah.
You can leave a little later. All right, and then just keep on your radar, August 4th, October 6th. That one, October 6th, is usually pretty hard to change simply because of our actuaries coming in, and then December 1st as we look out. So thank you for that. And then we do have an action item of our out-of-state travel, which I'll let Sean tell us about.
All right, thanks, Madam Chair. So on pages 25, and let me get there on the online version here. You have several out-of-state travel requests. All of these travel requests were included in our budget submission at our May board meeting. But typically we get this double verification that the board is good with us going on these trips. And so you have one for John Noble to attend the PRISM annual conference in May, Tammy Rao to attend the GFOA conference in May, Denise Pizzini to attend the Napa legal conference in June, and then for myself to attend the NCTR directors meeting in June. As I said, these are all of the organizations that we as staff members belong to, and we presented this as part of our budget request last minute. And now that it's getting close to time to plan for these trips, we asked for approval from the board as action items.
I move approval of the staff out-of-state travel.
I second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Is there any further discussion? I just want to say that St. Petersburg, Florida sounds like the best one, John. So you look like the winner. All right. All those in favor of approving the out-of-state travel indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Any opposed? Okay, we will move on then. Another opportunity for public comment after everything we just went through. I see we have a couple other people online. Lindsay Trineri and Kathy Miller. I'm sorry, Kathy Milo. I have the hardest time saying your name. Thank you for helping me. Anybody want to speak? All right.
Hi, this is Sarah Piper with Montana Federation of Public Employees. I just want to second our thanks and appreciation for Sean's leadership of the agency there and all the work that he does with stakeholder groups. You mentioned his calm demeanor and how that is so appreciated by staff and stakeholders there, and we certainly do as well. And I know I personally do when I call with questions. Or he's at a legislative hearing, it's very, very helpful to have his expertise there shared with the group. So thank you.
Finally, just again, I'll reiterate May 5th, our next meeting date, right here in the boardroom. Always have the opportunity for an online version of our meeting. That'll happen. Do it. All right, now we're on to the executive director's report. And got an executive summary.
So, Madam Chair, Parks and operations update goes really going.
Madam Chair, I'm only getting about half of what Sean is saying.
Okay, I think I'm talking about the same level as Carrie is. I don't know if it's maybe this thing is in the way or what, but. So on the screen here, number one, operations update. The only thing I wanted to, update the board on was that we've continued to do remote work for certain staff members. Some of them are 1 day per week, some of them are 2 days per week, and then some are working 100% in the office. So that seems to be still working as smooth as could be expected. We haven't really ran into any hiccups with that approach up to this point. But it's also still fairly new. I mean, we're about 6 months into that at the most. I don't think we're 6 full months into it yet. But so far, so good. And then as far as a staff update, I kind of already talked about this earlier, as a result of one of, Member Brown's questions, but Amber Mullen did take a different position in a state, agency for, more paid than what we could offer to keep her here. She started out as our administrative assistant in 2020 and then was promoted to a benefits specialist in July of 2022, which is something we like to try to do here at TRS. If someone's able to do a job at a higher level, we always look to promote from within first. But she's got to a point where she was able to accept a position at even a higher level than what we had available here. So that position is open. Tam, you know off the top of your head when it closes?
I think it actually closes today.
Okay, so
Yeah.
may close today. That'd be about right. That'd be about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then we'll start reviewing those applications and look to refill that position. Any questions on the summary?
Are you getting more applications these days than before? Is it about the same?
So I've not looked at this pool.
I have not
yet.
looked at it
Haven't looked
either,
at
so hopefully, I'm hoping we do, because the last time we only got 4 for, we had 2 positions open in the benefits area, and we got 4 for one and 5 for the other, and 2 of them were the habitual person that,
Right.
people that apply for everything, and their information is from years ago.
Oh.
So,
Yeah, so hopefully, I mean, I guess we'll know more once we look into that. The position we had the hardest time filling was that internal auditor, the new auditor position, and that one, I mean, we ran that several times and most, I don't know that we ever had a pool of more than like 4 people in any of those, and they would run for 3 to 4 weeks at a time. But with that said, I think that our eventual choice to hire Chris Fish, who was an internal candidate, I think that's working out really well. She's doing some great work for us, but the unfortunate part of auditors' work is it usually creates other work for people here at TRS. So we're uncovering lots of things, but it's actually going really well.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep, so then if there's no other questions on the staff update, the next item is the legislative update, the 2023 legislation update. So our 2 bills that were at the request of the TRS board are House Bill 117, which is our working retiree bill. Marta Bertolio is sponsoring that for us on our behalf. And it made it through the House side already, and it's been transmitted to the Senate. It has not been scheduled for a hearing yet. I think it was referred to the Senate Education Committee, but it hasn't had a hearing as of yet. And I don't expect it will until after transmittal break, which is the transmittal deadline's next Friday. That bill has not been amended at all. It's exactly as we proposed it. Hopefully it stays that way. House Bill 135 was our housekeeping bill, also sponsored on our behalf by Representative Bertolio. This bill passed out of the House. They did amend it in House State Administration to soften some of the independent contractor language we had in the bill. But I mean, really, it still requires what we wanted the most, which was an actual assessment being done at the employer level where they write it up. They essentially have to address those IRS points in a letter to us that confirms that the person truly is an independent contractor. So even with the softening of the language, TRS is, we still are in support of that bill going forward with the amendment on it. Our final bill that we asked for was Senate Bill 25, which is the University System Supplemental Contribution Bill. And as you might expect, it had a hearing and was, I think about 2 days later is all they voted to table that bill. So it just sits in the Senate State Admin Committee at this point. There are some other bills that.
Excuse me, Sean.
Yep.
Madam Chair, Sean, I was just wondering, what was the discussion behind tabling Senate Bill 25? I mean, were there huge concerns about it? Was it going to cost too much money? I mean, what was it?
So Madam Chair and Dee, there really wasn't any discussion to speak of. During the hearing, you know, there were questions. I think Senator Lynch, who was the sponsor, you know, he even said, like, you know, look, if you're not going to do anything with this, I would suggest we amend the bill to quit asking for this to come forward. But there really wasn't any discussion to speak of, other than a few questions about, well, where did this liability come from? You know, there was a couple of them on there that wanted to know how the liability came to be, which I answered. And then they really didn't discuss it. It comes with a big price tag. There weren't any opponents. No one testified in opposition in public. You know, what happens behind the scenes, I can't speak to, but I think it was the price tag, and ultimately it always seems to come out in those meetings like, well, where would the funding come from? And the answer is, unless there's some other appropriation made to cover it, the university system would have to come up with those funds out of their existing budget. So
Can you remind us the dollar amount this year?
so the increase, it would have to go from 4.72 to 13 point something. The one time only, the amount of the lump sum it would take to just maintain the 4.72% contribution rate is about 208 million. So the lump sum was pretty high, and then obviously you're really tripling the 4.72, which comes out to, I think, about 12 million a year, 13 million a year. So 3 times that on an annual basis.
So Sean, my next question is, if we can't have the whole ball of wax, are we going to next session ask for, say, a third of what we want? And then the next session after that, I mean, sometimes you just have to eat the boa constrictor a little bit at a time.
Right. I mean, we've had those discussions. In fact, I think we even drafted some legislation a couple of years ago to do just that. I mean, we certainly can give it a try.
Aren't we required by statute to ask for all of it?
I think we're required to bring, and yeah, I think that whatever we brought would have to, at least in part of it would have to be for all of it. And then, you know, there maybe it's a ratchet up though. You start a few, but we did draft that language a few years ago, maybe the last session or the session before. And there hasn't been any real interest from the legislature to take on a little bit of it at a time either.
I think where we came down on that, if I recall, was even though this dies every single time we bring it up, it does serve as a reminder to what happens if we try to wind down a retirement pension plan. So we decided maybe we're okay with bringing this up every year, just as an example of what not to do.
Close part of the system or have a group come out, that's what's gonna happen to us. There's a liability forever in perpetuity unless you're willing to pay for it right away, and no one is.
Well, I guess I'm just wondering if something could be amended in the next week to take it off the table.
Yeah, I mean, no one has seemed to have any interest in adjusting that contribution rate this session. For the most part, TRS has kind of been, you know, a little bit out of sight, out of mind. As you know, you and Dan Trost, we had the meeting. There's a bill this afternoon I have to go up and testify on that would make GABA 0% for all new hires. But other than that, Bill, as far as those that have been introduced, at this point, TRS has kind of been out of the fray. There are pretty strong movements with some of the Impera systems to make defined contribution the default system for PERS, because right now, currently, they default into the DB plan. And within a year, you have to elect if you want to go to the DC plan. So there are, targeted legislation to make DC the default, and then also to move layered amortization. And then if you add on to that, no chance of ever having any kind of GABA, guaranteed annual benefit adjustment. I mean, things could be headed even for TRS in the next few years. There might be bills to do similar things, but things could be headed towards getting the defined benefit plan to a point where it's not that attractive. And if you're already defaulting in the DC plan, then you are doing exactly what happened with the university system, which is you're starting to siphon money away from the DB plan, and that liability doesn't go away on its own.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, as far as other legislation that was not introduced by TRS, there was Senate Bill 18, which was, it came out of the interim SABA committee, and it provided a legislative policy statement, essentially saying the legislature won't provide any new benefits unless those benefits are projected to be fully funded. TRS was in support of that, and that bill's passed out of the legislature and actually has been signed by the governor at this point. Senate Joint Resolution 4 was at the request of Senator McCamey. This also came through the SABA committee, the interim committee, and it would provide for another interim study of TRS and PERS, which we were in favor of. I think any of those interim activities that can increase the education level of the people that sit on SABA, I think those are well worth the time. And certainly it's good to explore those ideas further that they have, so that they really truly understand what it costs to make some of the changes that they're thinking about. So we were in support of that. The final one, which wasn't introduced when I wrote this board packet, is Senate Bill 348, which has a hearing this afternoon in Senate State Admin. And I just spoke briefly about that. That one's sponsored by Senator McGilvery. And it would set the guaranteed annual benefit adjustment at 0% for all new hires as of anyone hired on or after July 1, 2023. And Dee and Dan and I met on that bill earlier this week. I think it was this week, wasn't it? Or was it last week? Maybe it was the end of last week. It was introduced, and we could make a case for being an opponent real easily, but we could also make a case for being informational. And the way we left it was we thought we should be informational with a strong lead towards opposition. So we'll see how that works out this afternoon.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Sean, I'm wondering if a few years ago, we were talking that we should have some sort of committee set up between senators and representatives to vet all retirement bills. Has there been any more discussion about that? So none of the retirement systems are kind of caught off base. So there would be a depth of understanding on a subcommittee going forward.
So, Madam Chair and Dee, you're speaking at the legislature was going to have a committee like that, correct?
Right.
There has not been anything established, although I've heard tell that they're kicking around setting up a select committee for the second half, after transmittal break, because there are quite a few legislative proposals that deal with the Impera systems, some of which provide more funding and some of them make other policy changes. So up to this point during the session, there's not. I think there may be a select committee though, the second half of the session. And then the study bill for this next interim is, requires members from LFC and SABA to both sit in on it, which I think is probably a good idea, because there's always the disconnect between the policy committee, which is SABA, and then the finance committee, which is the money side.
Yeah, that's over the years, it's been a problem. The left isn't talking to the right.
Right. Yep, so with that, Madam Chair, unless there's any other questions for me, that's the legislative update thus far.
And that is another opportunity for the public to have any say in what's going on in the legislative or any of Sean's executive director reports. All right, well, then we will move ahead to the IT manager's report. John Noble will be here for us.
Chair, member of the board, good morning. This will be very exciting if anybody wants to get another cup of coffee. So, should have in your packets, the IT manager's report, page 32, first page of the report, just kind of gives an update on what IT infrastructure is like. I won't read through that unless you would like me to. But are there any questions about, you can, really the big changes since, last year is that we have, moved to an environment here where we're much more capable to, work remotely. Most users here are using laptops. So they can take laptop out of this building, take it home or to another location and get back onto the state network and work remotely. We should be, down near the bottom, I put down 18 to 22 of the full-time employees here currently have laptops assigned. We have a handful of employees that are not planning to assign laptops to the nature of their work. The two imaging technicians that have scanners connected, remote work isn't a possibility for those positions. And then the executive secretary position up front doesn't do remote work as well. So within the next fiscal year, we'll end up moving to where we'll have all the FTEs that are capable or have the possibility of doing remote work. We'll have laptops and be ready to, will be enabled to be able to do remote work. The rest of our environment is fully virtualized. That hasn't changed. Most of our infrastructure is hosted by ITSD at the state data center here in Helena. Any questions on that infrastructure update?
So the positions that are not, capable of going home, what happened during COVID? Did it just not occur, or did
They were here.
They did come in.
And so, during COVID, the executive secretary position was here on site. The imaging technicians were here in the building processing, because those positions process mail as well as converting physical documents into electronic image documents. IT staff, I was here 2 days a week. Rex was here, I was here 3 days a week. Rex was here 2 days a week. We alternated to make sure we always had an IT staff person here. But for the positions that aren't set up for rows for remote work, they were here full-time even during COVID.
Interesting, I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, and it was a pretty narrow window. I want to say March or April through November is when we saw the sparsest attendance here, but those three positions were here full-time even through that. Page 33 had our expenditure update. I've got the comparison for the last 3 fiscal years, 21, 22, 23. And 23 was through year to date as of, I believe that's January. Should have put that down. There's not a lot of change in there. any questions about any of that expenditure year to year, fiscal year. I do have some notes at the bottom that, we're purchasing an additional Adobe Cold Fusion license. That purchase has been made, February this year. We have purchased that license to stand up another, Cold Fusion server, for the production environment. And what it will do is that currently our production mTrust server was handling all processing, all user processing on a day-to-day basis, as well as all report generation. And we saw performance issues occasionally when large, heavy reports, large data reports were being generated, where the users working in the system would see latency. The idea here is that we set up a server that will do nothing but reporting, and that the production server, when it reports requested, will hand off the report processing onto the additional server. Therefore, the users will not see any performance degradation as the reports being generated, because we've basically load balanced just the reporting piece of it onto a secondary system. That required the addition of some additional licensing from Adobe. That purchase was $9,300 expense for fiscal year 23, with an additional purchase for this year. And that will get us the cost of the license plus maintenance all the way through until June, and then it will sync up with the existing licenses, the other 3 licenses we have for Adobe Cold Fusion Enterprise, and put them all on the same June 16th or whatever it is, annual basis for maintenance. And then the last item I had on that page was that TRS is going to be migrating its Jira environment. So Jira is our issue tracking software that we use for mTrust development. All tickets for bugs and issues of enhancement requests or program changes, PCRs, go into Jira. Tickets are created, and Jira is the tool that's utilized to do issue tracking, and gets assigned. The developers pick up the tickets through the Jira software. They work on them. When they're ready to be migrated, the tickets get assigned to an IT staff person, and we handle the actual movement of those code changes through the source code repository, and then eventually out to the application server so that the testing team can go ahead and begin testing on them. We're going to migrate our Jira environment to a vendor-hosted cloud, and what's necessitating this is the fact that Jira has deprecated or is no longer licensing on-site server instances of their Jira software. So Atlassian is the vendor, and they are going to, and it's not unlike what a lot of other vendors are doing. They're moving to a fully hosted cloud solution. And currently we have a conditional IT purchase request approval from ITSD to move our data from an on-site server, which we've been hosting for years, to Jira's cloud environment, pending a security assessment. So I'm waiting to work with ITSD's security team to do an assessment of the vendor's cloud. We've already taken a look at the data that we have in Jira, and we've analyzed it with some SQL queries, looking for SSN patterns and personally identifiable information. And I've identified actually a relatively small number of Jira tickets that may have a PII that will need to be scrubbed. You know, and the data sitting in our data center here in Montana on our servers, we probably didn't originally want to put that data in there, but felt more comfortable with the fact that we owned it. It was our database. Moving that out to a vendor cloud, due diligence and liability concerns suggest we should pull that PII back out of that data before we actually do the migration on that. But that, pending the security assessment, we will be moving that to the new environment sometime this year. And you can see that there's going to be an additional $800 cost. It's not a ton of money, but that will be an additional expense for next moving forward. On page 34, I have a listing of the current software maintenance agreements and subscriptions that TRS has in place. There's really nothing new in there. Upcoming TRS IT projects forecasted. The report server is in process right now, so that was planned for Q1 2023. The report server is stood up, has the new Adobe license for Cold Fusion put on it. Rex is currently working with AMA on setting up the interface between the production M-Trust server and the new reporting server. The way that will work is the M-Trust server, somebody will request a report to be run. It goes into the database. The reporting server will see that the request has been made. It'll process the report. What we need is the users who are working on the production M-Trust server will need to be able to access the report that was generated in a different server. That's going to require some assistance from AMA to work on getting that set up, but we're hoping to have that done in the very near future. The Jira migration that I just talked about, that's planned for spring 2023. We'll be moving that Jira from a server that we currently have at the data center to Jira's cloud environment, or Atlassian's cloud environment. Windows Server upgrades. So we're currently running on an enterprise license for Windows Server 2012 R2. That ends of life in October 2023. So we will be moving to we will be moving all of our servers to Windows Server 2022. The purchase of the new Windows Server licenses will be included in the, I said FY23 budget, that's incorrect. I'm sorry, but I apologize for that. Should be the FY24 budget. A December 2022 quote from SHI Software House International was $17,295. And that was for the licensing as well as software assurance through April 30th of 2026. Software assurance from Microsoft is the maintenance agreement that comes with a server license purchase. That means that as long as you maintain the software assurance, as new versions of the software comes out, you're entitled to utilize and install that new, as long as software assurance is maintained. We don't have that software assurance for our 2012 licensing, which is why we have to purchase new ones. And then the server deployment will take place over a 2-month period for testing and evaluation. So our plan is probably right after the beginning of the fiscal year, we'll start off with some of our servers, we'll migrate them, make sure we do some testing, that everything's working fine, and we will roll deployments of new servers out with our production servers being the last ones to give us a full 60 days to vet any problems we run into. Not that we're anticipating any, but for moving from a 2012 environment to a 2022 environment there. And the last item I have there is the source code repository migration scheduled for right now. We're planning for fourth quarter 2023. So somewhere between October and December. We're currently running on in Subversion. The state was using Subversion until a couple of years ago. It moved from Subversion to Git and is hosting a GitLab environment. The state does, which is is paid for by our base rate, IT rate that we pay. So it's no additional cost. The CollabNet Subversion Edge that TRS has been using is no longer being maintained by the manufacturer. The software is still working excellent and doing a great job, but anytime manufacturer quits development on a product, it's only a matter of time until a Windows update or some other type of maintenance ends up breaking the software. And so we're going to move. It only makes sense then, since the state has a GitLab environment stood up that would not cost our agency any additional funds, for us to move from Subversion to Git. They're similar but different. There'll be some learning for us, as well as when we deployed the source code repository, we wrote significant amount of documentation, especially for the developers, describing the processes of how TRS, how they should manipulate data or code changes through the software environment per TRS's process. We'll have to do the same thing for Git. So we are I'm gonna put into my budget for 2024 to have some training for IT staff for us to go through and do get training. We did that when we moved to went into subversion. And once we become familiar with that, we'll test with Git and start rewriting the process documentation for the developers as well as for our software code migration procedures here internally. And hopefully get everything migrated over into the GitLab environment before the end of the year. Any questions about any of those very exciting?
Madam
Topic.
Chair,
Yes, Dee.
I have to say that anybody that uses words like servers, migration, upgrades, source codes, and all of that stuff is a geek after my own heart. My son works in the IT area, and he uses those words and it goes right through my head. I am glad that you are looking at moving, even though everything is still working. We don't want to become one of the major airlines and everything goes down at once. I'm glad you're looking forward.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Dee.
Hi, John. This is Dan Chamberlain. I have two quick questions for you. The first is, in your analysis of these budget projections and your IT requirements, have you noted any difference in need, positive or negative, based upon those people that are working at home?
No. Dan, actually, I would say maybe I would have anticipated that when we first had people start working from home, that the needs would be higher. But the observation, the experience has been no, that we haven't. And I will say that a lot of credit for that should go to Rex Merrick, our network admin. Because just like all other state agencies, we had to figure out how to get people to work remotely on a relatively short time frame. And honestly, with as small of an IT staff as we have, I think we've done a really, really admirable job of that. And the fact that the needs from the people working remotely haven't been, in my opinion, any higher than people working locally, really says a lot about the fact of how successful we've been about getting people set up to work from home. So I think we've done a really good job with it. The needs haven't been high at all. And so it's been fairly easy for us.
Thank you for that response, John. That's reassuring. The other question is much more minor. Under the Windows Server upgrade paragraph, it states down there in the second to the last line that you received a quote from SHI. The term is just odd to me. I was wondering if you could clarify. From 7/2023 to 4/30/2026 is a 34-month period. Do they have a fiscal year that normally begins on May 1, or why was that time frame so odd?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Or Dan, sorry. The reason is that the state has an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, and that all Microsoft licensing cycles on the 3-year term of the state's enterprise agreement. And we do what's called a true up of resources of Microsoft products that we use every 3 years when that licensing agreement is renewed. And so what happens is that based off that time frame they gave us, it looks like May 1st is the 3-year true up mark for enterprise agreements. So the term they gave us for software assurance will carry us through the current term ending April 30th, 2026. And that software assurance will be renewed on May 1st for another 36-month period after that. So anytime we look into a software assurance purchase through Microsoft, a multi-year purchase, they don't extend it out indefinitely. They extend it out for that 36-month term. And I guess that gives Microsoft and the state of Montana both opportunity to reevaluate that contract, those contract terms every 3 years to take a look at significant changes.
Thanks again, John. That was very enlightening. on that note, when you say that the fiscal year 24 IT budget is actually the right timing for that cost, would you intend then to pay that expense just in a lump sum once every 3 years?
So that 17,295 is the cost of the license and software assurance for the term listed. The software assurance itself is about 25% of the license cost. So I would expect that we would see an annual expense of estimated somewhere around 25% of that every fiscal year moving forward after that.
Okay.
But it wouldn't be the 17,295 because that includes the purchase of the license itself is included in there.
Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Thank you for pointing that out. All right, thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
I think you're off the. And I was looking at the time, and if it's okay with others, and if it's okay with you, Denise, I was looking ahead. Do you have a legal counsel report that we could throw in here and possibly application for benefits and adjustments, and then take a break and wait for?
Yeah, I can do a very quick
I
legal
figured.
update report.
I looked it back and I was like, that doesn't look like a big one.
Yeah, 15 minutes, so it doesn't have.
Well, Tammy's gonna do benefits and
Yeah.
adjustments in
Yeah,
the
there we go.
15 minutes, so we're good.
Yeah. That's okay with everyone.
Sure.
So, Madam Chair, members of the board, we have no contested cases going on and none anticipated. We haven't issued any final staff determinations on any questions or that could potentially turn into contested cases at this point. The only other thing that I would have to report at this particular point in time is, of course, when the legislative session is going on. I watch the administrative provisions that might impact the retirement system. There are proposed changes to procurement law. There was an interim group working on necessary changes to procurement law. That's, of course, how state agencies obtain goods and services in the marketplace. We have been, just as an example, the $5,000 has been the limit on a procurement, an agency procurement, not going through procurement services, the Department of Administration. I can't tell you the last time I think we bought a good or a service for less than $5,000, for up to $5,000. So they're looking at dramatically increasing the limits on the agency procurements and then the limited solicitation procurements and that sort of thing. So that's a good change. We're going to do training on the private information policy. That is also being revised the next time when we look at it. If we look at it again next year, it will be revised somewhat. They're adding a definition of CISO, the state Chief Information Security Officer position, adding the a reporting requirement to the CISO for what are now going to be called security incidents. And what I will say is that the change in the policy from security incidents to a data breach it was sort of foreshadowed in Brett Dahl's presentation to the board last meeting, is that if something occurs that has I would say it's a change from a probability to a possibility, has the possibility of causing a breach of somebody's personal information. There's a reporting obligation. At this point, there has to be an actual data breach before the reporting obligations arise. So there will be some changes potentially to our third-party agent agreement, our third-party contracts, and that sort of thing. There are, of course, other administrative things that pertain, will affect us, but none of any substantial impact at this point. At the end of the legislative session, I'll give you a sort of full rundown on what those look like, but those are the big hits right now. And unless there are questions, that's all I have to report at this point.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, this is Dan Chamberlain. I have a quick question for Director Graham. Given the fact that Nolan is reporting several quarters of no delinquencies and Denise is reporting no legal cases, are you at all concerned that these people are bored?
Oh, there's plenty of other things to work on. I can tell you that.
Now that we have an auditor giving them more jobs. to do,
Right, yeah. We uncover plenty every day. You know, and Denise has been working on some language in different forms of correspondence that for related W4R work that Tammy and the M-Trust team have done. There's plenty going on.
I'm sure there is.
And Member Chamberlain, thank you for saying board as opposed to unnecessary.
All right. Tammy?
Yes, ma'am. So, Madam Chair, members of the board, the application and benefit adjustments for retirement, you can see we're slowly ticking up. The 60 were processed by both the active and retired groups. Since the last board meeting, I will tell you that, you know, we sent this year, we do a bulk mailing every February of the upcoming for retirement applications, and we sent over 300 applications out in February, which is a little higher tick than what we've seen in the past. So what that means for this retirement season, we'll see, but we sent out over 300 where we're, in the past, it was like 250 to 280, somewhere along in that range. So that is it for me. Any questions?
Actually, could that be, Madam Chair, could that be, because the aging population of educators, and we're not replacing enough of us?
Member Brown, Madam Chair, Member Brown, which definitely could be, but I don't have any statistics to back that up or tell you for sure that that's the reason, but we're definitely seeing a slight increase this year.
Thank you.
And I mean, time will tell if it actually results in an overall increase or if it's a matter of people are asking sooner.
Yeah.
I mean, we won't really know that until we get through the retirement season, because we've been averaging around 650 a year.
Yeah.
The last several years, and we'll know more when we get like to July, but
Yeah.
it certainly could be an indicator that it's gonna be a busier season than normal.
All right. Well, thank you. So we want to
Pull one more thing forward.
pull one more thing.
Yeah, we
forward?
can pull the, yep.
All right. Are you ready to?
Sure.
Should we put you on
Yes.
the hot seat in this very second?
Well, this is.
Or should, what else? What are we gonna vote?
Well, I mean, we can, if everyone doesn't mind going over another, like, the 10-15 or so.
Should we
probably-
just quickly
Sure.
take?
We could do that.
We don't.
He's here. Probably has to head back to the legislature soon, so.
Nope, I'm done.
You're done.
I'm done till Monday. They've got their share.
What do you prefer, everyone? Does anyone need a break right now or?
Good too.
Okay, then we will value your time.
Oh, thank you.
We appreciate you coming in.
You bet. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Dan Bill. I'm the Executive Director of the Board of Investments, here to give you our annual report as required under 17.6.230. So if you'll go to page 2, as we've discussed before, the largest driver of returns at the Board of Investments is our strategic asset allocation. Here is a summary of the changes we made from 2021 to calendar 2022, or the changes we made in calendar 22, which apply to calendar 23. You can see we brought domestic equities down just a hair, as well as international equities, below range. We put a little bit more into real assets and real estate. As you can recall, those are our illiquid, higher yielding asset classes. We're in a good place. I think, as you know, the pension funds are not bankrupt. They are not, as some would say, in a death spiral. We are still accumulating assets into the trusts. We are paying benefits and paying down liabilities. So we have some flexibility to increase allocations to illiquid assets, get that additional yield, get that duration premium. So those are the changes that we had proposed. We didn't pull out of core fixed income as we have over the last several years. It's
not a bad time to be in fixed income for the first time since like 92. So left those alone and took a little bit off the table within the public equity space. Any questions on that? All right. Past and expected investment performance for TRS. This is as of January 2023. Fiscal year to date, up 5.54%. That will be a smidge down. It's been a rough February. Clearly the markets are not Aquarians and they don't like this month. So as of close yesterday, I think we were just shy of 5 for the fiscal year to date. You can see our 3-year, 10-year, and the most important number is our since inception is in excess of the 7.3 actuarial hurdle that you give us. Any questions on performance? If not, I'll breeze over the next slide quickly. This is just the monthly snapshot which we provide to our board. I believe this member Trost brings back to you. These are all our assets under management, coal, STIP, trust fund. It's busy. Likely this will change in the coming months as we've updated our reporting structure to the board. This has a little less value in that simplified quarterly reporting structure. So I think this busyness will calm down a little bit and actually be at a font that human beings are able to read. Right. Next slide, we're required to walk through our goals. As we've said, we're a perpetual fund. We strive to achieve in excess of 7.3 if possible, but also doing so understanding the risk reward returns of those assets and allocations that we make. Short story long on this one, no changes from the prior fiscal year. So as I've discussed before, we do a biennial comparison of CAP performance versus our peer organizations across the country. CEM benchmarking comes in and does a review of our performance versus the universe of peer pension funds. This does not look at things like trust fund or STIP or non-pension assets. So this report is very much benchmarked to just CAP. So the next slide, you can see independent analysis, our 5-year policy return of 10.9 was above the median of 10.7 of our peers, or the public median of 10.7 and above our peer median of 10.8. We do have, how do I discuss this? And member Trust, you may ask for yourself some assistance here. We will review the capital market assumptions next month or at the April board meeting. RBK, our investment consultant, puts those together. Over the last several years, there's been a lot of volatility, and I think that volatility has played itself out in capital market assumptions. Everyone can say they're preparing capital market assumptions for 20 years, but when you look at them and all of a sudden you have a 4% increase in your expected fixed income portfolio and a 8% decrease in your equities portfolio performance, doesn't seem like that's a long-term view. So the capital market expectations that you see described there are really not a time-bound RBK 20 to 30 year, but more inception to date type projections. Our liabilities, as I've discussed, is, sorry.
Yeah, and this is Dan Chamberlain. Can I ask a quick question about that?
You bet.
Do you evaluate the overall portfolio from volatility metrics like beta or alpha or other measures of volatility?
We do. So every quarter we report to the board on beta and alpha. Beta, I think we're just at about 0.6. So we're more than halfway correlated, but not outside the range of, we need to put the panic hat on. And actually beta is decreasing over time. Some of these illiquids we've been able to take on in real estate and real assets have been helpful there.
Thank you. How about Alpha? Where does Alpha sit now? And on that note, is it hard to assess either of these metrics to some of the illiquid assets?
Yes, we will also be discussing benchmarking at our next board meeting, which is always a death spiral. You know, how do you define non-core real estate? And the best definition we have so far is it's not core real estate. So that's a challenge. But also benchmarking against some of these liquids like private equity, everything's lagged. You know, 1-year appraisals come in on real estate. So a lot of that measuring of alpha, yes, it's important, but is the benchmark the critical component? The benchmark that you give us, we view as the critical component. That 7.3 is the benchmark that matters. But it still is important to look at what is that alpha over time. Are we allocating not only to what net of fees, well-performing assets, but is that having a accretive value on the liabilities? You know, we're well above the place that we need to worry about paying benefits. You know, we only need to get about 4%, 4.3% to pay benefits on an annual basis. Everything in excess of that is going to pay down liabilities. So
would it then be fair to say that your overall approach would be to look at that target expectation long-term on return of 7.3%, and then to figure asset classes that allow you to achieve that with the least possible risk?
correct. How do we get to 7.3? And if there, we have this scattergram that we look at every quarter, and you always want to be in the northwest quadrant. Returns in excess of peers, as well as lower risk than peers. And as long as I've been with the board, as well as the 5 and 10 year periods, we are well placed in that lower risk, higher return quadrant.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? If not, we'll go to the next slide. Key takeaways. This is the summary page of the several 100-page CEM report we received. Our 5-year net return was 11.4, above the peer medians, both public and similar size. Implementation costs, we did have a 0.5% implementation cost, which is below our US public median, but right in line with our peers. So implementation cost is what does it cost us to make the investments that we do. One bullet I want to touch on is down under cost and effectiveness. So that last slide shows, or that last section shows, we were 50.4 bips above our benchmark cost of 46.4. So we were above what our benchmark would have said we should be at as far as relative costs of purchasing the assets. However, that is a reflection of capitalism still working. And if you look at the last bullet, 3.9 bips above the benchmark cost, by paying that extra 3.9 bips, we were able to deliver 263.6 additional basis points of performance. So we went with the best. What that is a reflection of, we picked the best managers, and the managers were able to deliver. So that is why you see that 3.9% above, or 3.9 bips above our peer benchmark. Any questions there?
And if I recall, this is a 5-year look back, and we've made some moves in the last year or so to reduce fees a little bit. So that will be shown until we get down the road another 4 years or something.
Correct. So we had, and actually, that is a wonderful segue to the next slide. Second to last. We continue to decrease fees as a percent of AUM. So these are investment fee ratios over the last several years. Some of the things that did not show up in the CEM benchmarking report is we're now totally passive within the domestic equity portfolio. Save a little bit on the small cap. We think there is some sizing bets. small versus large, but it's still a passive portfolio. That will be reflected in full in the subsequent report, as well as the changes we made in our high yield managers. We were able to get those fees down quite a bit as well. We're currently working on international equity. CEM, it's a great benchmarking tool, but if it's one of those reports you just put on the shelf and brag about it here and then, doesn't do you much good. We were shown to be a little high in the international equity space, so we're going to work renegotiating those contracts to get that fee structure down a bit. Any questions on fees? If not, last slide. One of the ways that we're additionally able to reduce fees is we are able to work with the executive and others to bring about additional funds to support BOI. So last year we worked with the governor's office to implement an ARPA program that was able to rebate about 20% of your fees that you otherwise would have paid to us to manage your investments. So as I'm able to bill additional pools of resources, I'm a proprietary rate. Board of Investments under the UIP is a proprietary rate. We charge a percentage of assets. Well, in this case, we were able to charge against varying other pools. So we issued dividends back to you in equaling about 20% of the total fees you otherwise would have paid to BOI. This last slide touches on ESG. We know it's an issue. We were happy to work with Representative Terry Moore out of Billings, who was the former chair of the Board of Investments back under the Martz and Schweitzer years to implement or to propose House Bill 228. It requires the board to take pecuniary factors as the primary driver of our investment decisions, as opposed to any environmental, social, or governance considerations. That bill has moved out of Senate Business and Labor. It's heading to the Senate floor. Was hopeful we get that done before the end of February, but for some reason, everybody waited until the absolute last minute to drop their bills. So something like 400 bills dropped this week. Everybody's backed up, everybody's cranky, everybody's sick. So let's just wait until everybody gets a few days of vacation after transfer break to start talking about anything we care about. Madam Chair, that is my annual report, and I am happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Steve.
Director, I'm wondering, I see this Montana comeback plan on the left. Is this the thing that started this whole idea of House Bill 228? And if so, why wasn't it done before so we could save the taxpayers some money?
Short answer, no, that was not the first we've talked about it. We've been working with Senator Moore since probably Representative Moore since last April on this bill. We've never invested pursuant to any ESG structure. We are a risk return portfolio. So there was essentially what House Bill 228 is codify our current practice.
Thank you.
You bet.
Is there any other legislation that you're following that you want to talk about or no?
That I want to talk about or I should talk about? Relative to pensions, I think there is a lot of conversation around pensions this year, particularly the executive budget led with 107 million into public safety systems, basically putting enough assets into them OTO with a large budget surplus to bring them back to actuarial soundness. Not enough to as I see it, there's two buckets. There's get them to actuarially sound, and then there's the judges. And the judges system is very well overfunded and doesn't bring them to judges level, but gets them to about TRS level. I mean, you guys are sitting in a very good place. You amortize under 30 years, your funded ratios are increasing. So, I think that's part of the reason why there's not a lot revolving around you. I think that people believe in the legislature what they want to believe, whether or not the numbers back it up. So The conversation around the GABAs for your employees, or your covered employees. From the board's perspective, we have no dog in that hunt because you're funded well enough to afford that GABA, and there's no changes in the investment structure necessary to do it. So really TRS, we're sort of in a hands-off space, nothing there. I think within the PERS system, the board will have to have some conversations about how we approach that because there is potential to have implications on cap investment strategies and assets under management over the medium to longer term. Otherwise, it's coal trust and housing.
If the investment structure needed to change for PERS, but not for TRS, how would you bifurcate cap so that we could get what we need and then get what they need?
So we've actually spent some time talking about that after the executive budget came forward with the public safety plans, getting that additional 107 million. Essentially, we'd have to have cap 1 and cap 2. So you'd have cap 1 with a different asset allocation than cap 2 based on funded ratios and liquidity needs. I mean, really, when it comes down to it from the board's perspective, we invest your money for the purpose of paying benefits. That's number one. Extinguishing long-term liabilities is number 2. So as we do the asset allocation, we want to have an eye on extinguishing that asset or that liability. But primary driver is there's a contractual constitutional right with those beneficiaries to get the payment. So in the event that assets start to shrink because of policy decisions, they would move into a more fixed income structure. What could we get in terms of yield on an annual basis to meet that? With PERS, it's about $300 million a year in benefit payments that are necessary to go out the door. So that side would be more fixed income, more liquid. The other cap would be more focused on, okay, let's continue to make the pension payments, but also use investment income to extinguish that liability.
I would just like to give you a compliment. I feel like the Board of Investments for the state of Montana has done us very well. And I feel like, someone like with your stature and you are from the state of Montana, you work extremely hard, you know a lot about our legislature and you're highly respected. And I just want to say thank you for what you do on behalf of teachers.
Thank you.
Very much so.
If you could get your executive director to repeat those words after you, that would be fantastic. Yeah. What could go wrong? The people in charge of TRS, PERS, and the VOI are from Butte, Anaconda, and Roosevelt County.
And I'm an Anaconda girl too.
Yeah.
So.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Look
Thank
forward
you
to
for
seeing you all again soon.
jumping right in and giving us
We
your.
have some treats if you want to stick around. I want to take a break.
We're flying out for Disneyland in 6 hours for my birthday.
Cool.
So I'm gonna eat churros for the next.
Joy, thank you. Well, we're gonna take a break right now. We're ahead of schedule, so let's come back at 10:30 and we'll shortly wrap up. All right, well, I'll call the meeting back to order. And we've gotten through a lot of our agenda so far, so we'll jump into the long-range planning and the board training, election of officers, and then it's like adjournment. I didn't forget anything, right?
No.
Okay. Okay, we'll look at the strategic planning commitment worksheet then, Sean.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the board, it's behind tab 9 for those of you here in the room, and then I have it on the screen for those that are remote today. I'll just walk through this fairly quickly, but I mean, I'll talk about each one a little bit. If you have any questions as we go, feel free to stop me and ask, and we will go through our update on this. As a reminder, so this upcoming August meeting will be primarily a full-on strategic planning meeting. We won't do a lot of other regular business. It will be mostly the whole day doing strategic planning. We will use Jim Cairns to help facilitate that effort. And that's when this commitment worksheet, as well as the overall strategic plan, will get updated for the next 2 years. So we're kind of winding, that we're nearing the end of this, as far as this document goes, just so you're aware. So the first one there is maintain actuarial sound plan, conduct a tax qualification every 5 years. And we did do this work in fiscal year 2021, when this plan was relatively new. And the next one won't occur again until fiscal year 2026. We had Ice Miller, our tax counsel, did that on our behalf. The next one is address any issues from the pension study group and then actively participate in that study. Our outcome was well-informed policymakers, and of course that happened over the interim leading up to this legislative session. We did participate in those meetings. I guess if you wanted something measurable, an interim committee didn't come out with anything that harmed TRS in any way. So I guess that was good. The third one there is conduct an experience study. As you all know, we did that. We saw the results of that last May. And then the board adopted new assumptions that went into effect for the July 1, 2022 actuarial valuation. So that is complete. This next one is identify, catalog, and prioritize IT enhancements. So that's both on the M-Trust front as well as just in general IT enhancements. And then conduct periodic planning and budgeting board sessions to discuss budget parameters for IT investment. If you remember, we did go through this where we looked pretty hard at did the board want to approve an overall level of funding for future enhancements versus like distinct projects like we were doing previously, where we had phase 1 and phase 2 that were sort of overarching projects that were multi-year and really multi-million-dollar things. And the board, if you just to remind everyone, we decided to take it on a year-by-year basis, and instead of being project driven, it's more enhancement driven, and it's up to a certain level. And that's what we've done the last 2 years, and likely what we will propose something similar to that this next fiscal year. We'll do that in May. Let's see, the fourth one there is the fifth one. Identify metrics for certain enhancements where appropriate. And then that can illustrate the return on investment. Not a lot of those make it to the board level, but certainly for various things that John is looking at, whether it be an upgrade or when there's decisions to be made about one software provider versus another. He does do those for my benefit before we make those decisions. Those are all done within the confines of the budget that's already approved by the board. But I think you could tell just from the IT update that he did, there are a lot of things that come up. It's not that they're unknown, but they come up through the course of the year that we know this license is going to be no longer good. We have to do something different. And then he does a good job of presenting. We can go, down road A, B, or C, and this is the cost comparison. So I do get those from him quite often on various IT enhancements, just so you're aware. Obviously, if we had something really big that came to the level of our overall budget, the board would see those same metrics. Let's see, the final one on that page is implement online retirement application. So that says FY 2023 planning. And I think that we can say that is still true, although the focus is going to shift a little bit after we've implemented the online withdrawals. I think we've recognized that we want to do more robust identity verification. And we want to get something in place in that regard before we really get very far at all down the road of planning for the online retirement app. So our next big focus will be on coming up with and figuring out exactly what solution we're going to use for online identity verifications, excuse me. before we get really too far into the online retirement app, which actually works out just fine because Tammy and I and the rest of the steering committee really wanted to have online withdrawals in place for some length of time so that we really could understand everything there was to learn from that, you know, because it's still relatively new. There may be things that come up that we haven't even ran into yet, you know, so we wanted that to be out there for approximately 6 months before we really started doing requirements, gathering and stuff on online retirement app. So that will be one. I don't think we will have a solution in place, but before the end of this fiscal year on the verification of identity verification. But I think by that point, we should certainly at least be to the point where we know which solution we want to take. And then that'll be something that happens early fiscal year 2024. And then I would say in earnest planning on online retirement app would happen after that, which would be approximately middle of fiscal year 2024. Agree with all that?
Yeah.
So we are making progress there, but we recognize we need to take one more step before we open up the floodgates too much.
Yeah.
Next one is develop a responsive web design proof of concept in the test environment. And again, so what a responsive website is a website that you can view on pretty much any kind of device, and it will look the way it's supposed to look. So whether you're on an iPhone or you're on your PC, we want to get our TRS website as well as our member and employer portals to work that way. And Darla and John have done some work in that regard, and you actually will see a prototype at our May meeting. Darla will put one on the screen so you can see, and we'll get the go ahead to start working in that, you know, to make that happen across our entire website.
It is difficult to look at it on a phone.
It is, you have to really
Make it big.
Yeah. Yeah. Next one, continue business process improvements and workflow documentation while building online processes. And so the two that were specifically mentioned were online withdrawal application and online retirement application. And I mean, Tammy, you have some of the figures on the online withdrawals. I mean, that is in production, and if I remember right, it was about 70-some%.
That are actually using the online withdrawal application, and I think Nolan's not in the room. I think they had to void about 9 applications on the system because they didn't, I don't know if they all were for the same reason, but they're supposed to complete a notarization form and send that into the office before their application can be processed. Right now, because of the fact of what Sean just mentioned, the identity verification process and the things that you want to have in place, they still have to have that manual step. But yes, over 70% are coming through the online withdrawal application, and very little staff, phone calls because of that. So that's great. And the other thing that's not mentioned there is we have an online beneficiary designation. That was the first piece that we put in for folks to use in my TRS and to update their beneficiary.
Yeah, and I think that actually happened before this.
Yep, it did. Yep.
Before this start of this plan. I
Yeah.
think it was part of our last strategic plan.
Yep.
So, I mean, Tammy referenced it, but really that is the sort of the impetus for better online identity verification, is so we don't have to have them print and have something actually physically notarized and sent to us. Because right now there's a time frame built into the online withdrawals. We don't have all the information within 60 days, I think it is, then we're gonna void that transaction. And we've only had 8 out of almost a couple hundred, I think, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Nolan's group does their due diligence of trying to contact those members and make sure that, what's the reason, or can you get this form to us? And so for those 8 folks, they had to void.
Yep. All right, so moving on. So this one's develop procedural documentation for each team. That's an ongoing item. We haven't hired a contractor or done any sort of shadowing of individuals to come up with any brand new workflow or work documentation as far as like what a classical desk manual would look like. We do have, some of these things are documented in the Entrust Health. And then we have older, desk manuals for some of the positions at TRS. So it's ongoing. We haven't got to the point though where we've decided to start a full-on documentation project where I think we would need to have additional resources to do that. It just hasn't been that high of a priority compared to the other things we've been doing. Continue with formal strategic planning. I already talked about that. We'll do that this coming August, and this is part of that as well, this update. The next one is acquire training and remote notary certification. We've decided to hold off on that. I think I've already updated you in that regard. Hopefully we will get to the point where we don't even necessarily need to do that. It'll depend how the identity verification goes. The next one was explore ACH transfers. I gave the board an update on that. Denise did a bunch of research. It was going to potentially be a legislative proposal. We decided not to do that because there's other state law that prohibits it from us requiring it. And then update the TRS pay plan to fully implement broadband 25. We did, complete the first step of that in May of 2022. We'll be bringing, updates to that to the personnel committee, prior to our next meeting this coming May. Let's see. So top of the next page there. Coordinate executive director and board member attendance at the superintendent meetings. That was completed last spring. And that obviously that's where some of our working retiree legislation came from. I have already been requested to attend a couple this spring. And those that I don't hit this spring, I'll likely will try to hit in the fall, just so they get an update of whatever legislative changes do come about, especially on the working retiree front. So I'll just schedule those, either this spring or next fall. As soon as I can after the changes, but obviously I have to wait till those changes are final. Let's see, continue staff attendance at educator conference, the MFPE annual conference, and MASBO and SAM conferences. In fact, just yesterday, Darla, Nolan, and Janelle held a termination pay webinar for MASBO members, which is good. Those are the clerks that submit those termination pay on behalf of the employers. As you know, I attended all the superintendent meetings, and our staff also attends, and did last year as well, the annual meeting, annual MFPE conference meeting. Let's see, reach out to members in a manner that is timeline and status oriented, utilize interest to generate mailings when possible. Tammy, you want to touch on this one? Because there are a couple of things that we just rolled out or are just about to roll out.
Yep,
right with this.
Yep, Madam Chair, Sean, so, as far as new members, we have already, that's in production. We already send out correspondence, to new members on a monthly basis. Pre-retirement, we implemented, a while back, the required minimum distribution process. But in part of that process, meant letters going to someone that is turning 50 or 55 based upon whether they're tier 1 or tier 2. Age 60, just kind of a birthday letter, then also telling them information about retirement, what they can do at age, or what they will have to do at age 72. But what is about to be rolled out as part of this first maintenance release, which will go into production on the 16th of March. The first letter that will be issued will not be until April 1st because it's going to be part of that RMD monthly bulk processing. We have added a vesting letter that will tell a person, hey, congratulations, you're now based upon your service. Well, obviously we'll have the disclaimer in there that it's unaudited service, but you are a vested member with us, and this is means that, what it entitles you to. So that will start happening on April 1st. And that will be the end of that strategic plan.
Okay, so then the next one there, continue to promote communication with members and employers about system functions, improvements, processes, and transactions. We did go through this with the rollout of the online withdrawals module, and And part of that actually includes the employers doing an online certification that the person actually did terminate employment. So some of those steps are all really valuable because those are the kinds of things that will need to be built into an online retirement application in the future. So, I mean, it's a good test of some of those concepts that the member can work on something and then something gets sent to the employer, they know to go in and also do the certification, which is good.
And just one comment on that, as well as, based upon the feedback that I've gotten from Nolan, they've had to call a few employers to say, hey, by the way, there's a certification process on your wage and contribution system. Please go out and certify the member's termination date for these folks. But, most, I think it's just been a few, but most of them are, there was a communication from our office that Darla put together and sent out to all employers, so I think it went smoothly.
We reviewed it yesterday as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounded like, my impression was for the most part, it was the communication that went out about it was effective because like you said,
Yeah,
very
very
few
few.
had to call and say, well,
Yeah.
we're doing it.
Yeah, but it was, like Sean said, it is a precursor of what we want to use for the online retirement application process, because that will be, heavily used and expected for our employers to use to communicate to us.
Let's see, so the next one there is continue with member surveys to inform our strategic direction. And our plan is to have a draft survey for the board to review at the May meeting, upcoming May meeting. One of the areas that we're gonna, I think, want to focus on again is gonna be surrounding the whole question, especially for different stages of your career, whether you're a brand new member or sort of a mid-career member, or you're nearing the end, or even perhaps a retired member, is questions that are aimed at getting information from our membership about, do you value defined benefit plan? Is it part of your decision process? When you were picking a career, especially for those brand new members, because there's still a lot of commentary floating around the halls of the Capitol that younger people don't care about defined benefit plans. And I don't believe that that's true. I mean, I know I got a teaching degree, and part of why I did that was I wanted to have my summers off to rodeo, and I knew I was going to have a good retirement when I was done. I never actually ended up teaching in the classroom, but that was a part of why I went into it to begin with. So that was the case for me. And our last survey showed that over 80% of the new hires still feel that way. They value that DB plan. So I think it's important for us to update that information and have it available going into this next interim, especially. Let's see, last couple here. Explore discussion of joint issues on topics relevant to both, like the TRS Board of Investments and Impera. Dan Director Bill was just here this morning. I go up and give a similar presentation to BOI each fall. There hasn't been a whole lot of interest from that board to do anything different up to this point, but I mean, that doesn't mean that there won't be in the future, especially if the interim committees start to come up with real solid ideas that we can tell they're going to get behind it. We may need to meet jointly.
Well, the last time that we put a big effort into meeting jointly, it started off with essentially a joint meeting during a time when BOI was already. We have to honor the fact that they're putting in a lot of time and effort already, well beyond what the other boards are. And so we tried to incorporate into that. And then from that meeting, they developed a committee that met for a couple of years with the chief of staff. And essentially, the general goal was, so what were the issues that came out of that we need to try to meet? What's happening? My guess is right now, the way things are going, there are probably almost no issues, with the exception of maybe what's going on with the changes at Impera. But, we're not going to have, there might be a good reason to meet with the board at a time when the board's there and actually listen to some of their stuff. But we're not going to have hardly issues in Florida, I don't think.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think Director Villa brought up one reason we need to be engaged in the communication and the outreach to everybody when he said that we are going to be getting more or less a rebate because somebody's paying attention to what kind of fees we're paying. I think that's hugely important. I mean, we're not talking about $50 here. We're talking millions of stuff.
Well, that's it. Member Brown, that from my perspective, this is Scott, that's an informational piece that I think is valuable between boards. Not in and of itself, I'm not sure it's an issue at all. But it is certainly something that we need to understand and we need to appreciate.
I agree. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
I mean, where I could potentially see us, needing to have a joint meeting, and I think, Scott is correct. It could even happen just on, even between Impera and DOI, but let's say that over the interim, that committee gets really serious about creating a brand new defined contribution plan in TRS. So that we would really then at that point need to be managing two completely separate retirement systems, really. Your ones, DC would not be anything similar to the DB at all. That would have implications for BOI certainly, because you have a dwindling payroll, which is gonna mean contributions are dwindling over time, and then you get into those asset allocation questions and things like that. I mean, I could definitely see, like, if something like that were to either happen, go into law, or have a really good chance of going into law, we would, I think, want to circle the wagons for sure.
Absolutely, but on an information basis, even just observing what goes on in a BOI meeting where they're discussing allocations and why. For members that aren't familiar with a lot of the work that happens on the board, that's pretty useful information. And Impera itself is kind of a horse of a different color as well. So sometimes it's just nice to know what they're putting up, you know, what they have to do to have a solid foundation and how their board is made up and what's going on with it. Sometimes it's just beneficial to know that as a retirement community.
I used to have a lot of our board meetings there and just that connection as well. Don't need to anymore, but.
Director Graham, this is Dan Chamberlain. I have a question. You know, when looking at these three agencies, it seems like our questions about appropriate levels of integration with Impera would be possibly about different kind of software platforms that we're using, whereas our conversation with BOI has a very different intent. So, for example, the one concern I've had about BOI as it operates in Montana is that each of the fiscal resources that it is accountable for may have a different actuarial plan, may have a different time frame. And I'm wondering if there's ever any relevance for a discussion there about possibly creating tranches inside BOI that are specifically invested for the purposes of the fiscal responsibility that they're attempting to solve for, namely TRS.
Well, I guess the only thing I can really respond to that right now is that the cap is exclusive to the defined benefit pension plans. And really right now, Impera, PERS, the biggest system, is amortizes in 43 years. We amortize in 25 years. Most of those safety systems are, you know, they're more than 43 years, but they're not. Those are small systems and they're not, you're not going to change much related to that asset allocation. There's very little difference actuarially between 43-year amortization and 25-year amortization. So I don't think right now there would be any reason to change the allocation of cap because PERS is somewhat different than TRS. Now that could be a totally different conversation and argument if you were looking at just the judges versus some of these other systems. But, you know, obviously TRS doesn't administer the judges system. So I guess if in regard to your comment or question about there being a specific investment track for our system being TRS. I think we already have that in the cap pool.
Well, and Dan mentioned earlier today, Dan Villa, that if we get to the point where things are different enough that they would entertain the idea of a cap 1 and a cap 2, so they would actually do something slightly different if we needed them to.
Yeah.
So they're certainly open to it if we get to that point.
So based on that conclusion, and I agree with you, I think there is very little actuarial difference from 42 to 25 years. That can be demonstrated mathematically. That would mean that we have less of a need or less of an impetus potentially to explore these discussions on joint issues, at least with BOI.
I guess my take on it is until we, I mean, I think there would be some kind of triggering event that would, prompt us to look to have a joint meeting with BOI at this point. And I can tell you, I work very closely with both Director Villa and Director Swindon, as well as his deputy director up there on day-to-day issues. I mean, there's a lot of communication back and forth, especially during the legislature with various bills that we both need to go up and testify on.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and then the final one there was research working retiree issues and come up with a recommendation, which we did that. It's in the form of House Bill 117. The board supported that, and it was introduced on our behalf by Representative Bertolio, and it's currently making its way through the legislature. So that is the update, Madam Chair. Are there any other questions for me? I'm happy to address them.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we can move forward with our board training, which is also a discussion item.
All right, Madam Chair, members of the board. The policy we're looking at today is TRS's private information policy. The heading's not on the policy. This is but this is the substance of the policy. And it sets forth TRS's objectives for maintaining privacy and security of personal information. As I indicated in my legal update before, there are some amendments proposed to the statutes that underlie this TRS policy that will, I'm quite certain they will pass and will need to be incorporated after the legislative session. But for now, quickly, private information is a first name or a first initial with a last name with any of the listed data elements included. So a social security number, another tax identification number, an identity protection, personal identification number issued by the IRS, a driver's license number, an identification number issued pursuant to Title 61. That's if you don't get a driver's license, you can get a state issued ID under that statute, a tribal identification or enrollment number, an identification number issued by a what do I want to say? I'm trying to group them all together, and it would probably a territory of the United States. Thank you. An account or credit card number or medical record information. Redact in the context of this policy means that we would truncate or redact private information or truncate is in here as well, a social security number to the final 4 digits. Frankly, to my way of thinking, the final 4 digits of my social security number have become ubiquitous. Everybody asks for them, everybody knows. So I'm not exactly sure how they're private information anymore, but so be it. So of course, the fundamental objective of this policy is to discuss how TRS protects private information, primarily of our members. And social security numbers have a particularly sort of important, there are federal laws that prohibit the use and disclosure of social security numbers for other than, pretty specific purposes. TRS is required to gather and use and disclose personal information, including social security numbers, for our retirees, our members, for purposes of verifying identity and for tax reporting. So we do collect a wide range of private information, social security numbers, names, birth dates, bank account numbers for EFT transactions, etc. We're entitled to do that. We keep that information secure according to this policy, and we use it and disclose it only in conformity with this policy. We're a small shop, TRS staff, 22 people. For the most part, everybody in the office has access to, because they have a job need to have access to personal information. Of course, in our system, security parameters are set, so you have access to the information that you need to have access to do your job. But again, given the small size of our office, that's pretty full access for most staff members are going to have access to names, social security numbers, etc. We use the information only as necessary to perform the job duties and functions of each individual and the business operations of the retirement system as a whole. Specific to SSNs, we gather full social security numbers only where necessary to, again, verify the identity of an individual and to properly report for tax purposes. Again, a lot of our forms, because they're related to paying out money, verification of identity related to paying out money, and for tax reporting purposes, a lot of our forms and documents still contain full social security numbers. Where it's not necessary to have a full social security number, we ask for the truncated, the last 4 digits of the social security number. We may disclose private information, including social security numbers, to third parties who do business on behalf of the retirement system. We call those our third-party agents. We have our third-party agent agreements that we bind them all to. So Kavanaugh McDonald, AMA, the entities that frequently have access to our data and that are all bound to those agreements. Other than the business purposes, we don't have to have an authorization from a member to disclose personal information. In those circumstances, we are legally entitled to use them with appropriate protections. Any other disclosures to third parties require an authorization for release of information from the member. And any disclosure to a third party, other than our third party agents, where the full number is required for a particular purpose, the social security number if disclosed would be truncated. I'm frankly kind of the exception to that. Most of the documents, most of our disclosures to third parties who aren't third party agents of ours are probably for legal purposes. And a lot of times they're to legal counsel for the person on the other side of a contested case matter, et cetera, or to the court in a filing. And frequently that means the whole document is provided, including the full social security number. TRS staff is not allowed to maintain or use personal information on portable media, whether it's a thumb drive, a laptop computer, or that, if it is not protected, and not allowed to do so in excess of what's necessary to perform job duties and functions. For the most part, if we're working outside of the office and somebody is accessing member information, they're doing so through our VPN. I don't think we have, I'm not aware of any circumstances where people take portable media with member information on it, that they're not getting to it through a secure VPN. We contractually, again, require all third-party agents who have personal information to have a security policy designed to safeguard. That actually is another one of the changes that's being made to in 2 different legislative offerings, where the language sort of hints at a heightened obligation on the part of the third party with respect to complying with state policy and security framework is the language that's used. We've had conversations, I've had conversations with the state information officer, chief information officer about the intention of those changes. And so, you know, any necessary changes will be made to our third-party agent agreement and that when we have final language. The notice of breach of security and data system, again, is going to be as described in the policy now. We're required to notify of a breach of a data system. We will now be required to notify of a security incident, which may simply be a circumstance where somebody has gained access to a system, whether or not they've actually gained access to data. The reporting requirement, not necessarily the individual notification requirement, but the reporting requirement to the state, the chief information security officer will be in addition to this policy almost certainly. Otherwise, we are now, and that doesn't change, we are obligated to notify the Attorney General's office of a breach circumstance where a notice to individuals is required. It doesn't appear that that requirement is changing in the proposed legislation. But again, I sort of reserve judgment until it's all done and signed and I know specifically. So any questions? If not, that's.
No changes, so I don't have to sign this unless it does change. Yeah,
Right.
the legislature.
And almost definitely, we will be doing that in the next, August or so timeframe.
So the notice to all of the members that something may have happened, that doesn't change. It's only if something has happened that it goes out to the members.
Yeah, right. So right now, the notice to members is related to a data breach.
Okay.
And so that sort of gets back to the probability. I mean, you don't have to notify people unless there is a breach where it is reasonably, you can reasonably determine that somebody's information was or may have been violated. And sometimes that breaks down to IT determining, did they just get into the system or did they actually get into files? And I'm probably simplifying that too much for IT purposes, but now it may simply be enough that they've gotten into the system. But again, we'll know for sure how far reaching that
Might not
is.
even be into the system, it's just, they've got a door open for access.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Denise. This is another opportunity for public comment. We need it. Appreciate the information as always. And then finally, today we need to elect a new vice chair. Is anyone interested in the position? I know it's highly sought out. Dan Chamberlain, would you like to do this?
Muted, Dan,
You're muted,
but we heard you say yes.
so we'll vote you in.
So moved.
Okay, just to clarify, I'd be happy to do it, but I want to make sure I understand. That means filling in for you if you're not available. Is that correct, Carrie?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Would you provide me with Robert's Rules of Order so I can review that?
I'm sure that's
Sure,
right on
yeah.
Sean's desk.
Yeah, we can get through that. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. I'd be happy to serve.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Right, so we need a motion to elect Dan Chamberlain as our vice.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye, please.
I,
Chair votes aye as well. Daniel, you are the vice chair of the Teachers Retirement Board.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for doing.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
on that note, Sean, has there been any movement toward replacement of Sarah?
There has not that I'm aware of. I had a brief conversation with Lieutenant Governor Juris when Sarah resigned, you know, and I sent her all the appropriate documentation. And she said that they would work to replace her, but with the legislative session going on, I just, you know, it's probably not a real high priority for them right now. I mean, they are, I know they're aware of it, but nothing yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
good question. It's a
Yep.
Good question. Sometimes this takes a while and sometimes it happens right away. It's just, you just never know. All right, well, last thing we need is a motion for adjournment.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Hi.
Bye.
Chair votes aye as well. All right, we will see you guys May 5th.